Hello, and welcome to or welcome back to How to Change the World, the podcast that equips change makers with the lessons, tools, and inspiration to drive meaningful impact. I am Catherine Alonso, and today I am joined by Scott Stirrett, who is a Canadian entrepreneur, author, and social impact leader whose mission is to help people fulfill their full potential. He's the founder of Venture for Canada, which is a national charity that has supported over 10,000 young professionals since its launch in 2013 and raised over $80 million in funding. Scott is the author of The Uncertainty Advantage, which is a practical guide for young professionals navigating today's unpredictable world of work. And as you will see from our conversation, I think offers very many incredible tips, tools, tricks, and lessons for any of us navigating the professional world today. Because what Scott talks about is one of my very favorite passion topics, which is the rapid rate of change that we operate within and the incredible sense of fear that creates. And what Scott taps into is that the reason it is scary is because it is uncertain. And our conversation offers so many tangible ways that you can manage and deal with that. So before I step on our conversation, I just cannot wait to share this with you, my incredible chat with Scott Stirrett. Scott Stirrett, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
I am so looking forward to this conversation. I'm very grateful that you're here with us today. So thank you. Scott, I want to ask you to start with, just jumping straight in, how you would explain your job to a 5-year-old.
I would say that I help people create things because at the core of being entrepreneurial is the ability to identify and act upon opportunities to create a better world. So in a nutshell, if I say in like one sentence, is I help people create things in the world.
I love that. And how did you get into it? Talk us through how you found entrepreneurship and what that journey looked like.
I founded a national charity called Venture for Canada when I was 22. And it came from my experience actually living in the United States. I'm from Canada. And I went to school at Georgetown. And while I was at Georgetown, I'd seen a American organization that sadly no longer exists called Venture for America. And I thought, this is a great idea. What about trying to do some kind of Canadian equivalent? And after I graduated from Georgetown, I worked at Goldman Sachs. And I had no background in finance, and it wasn't a fit for me personally. And after around a year, I quit my job in New York City, and I moved back to Canada to create this not-for-profit. And I slept on the floor of an apartment that had no furniture for months, and it was just me. And it was both a thrilling but also anxiety-inducing time in my life. And I created Venture for Canada to solve a problem I saw firsthand, which is that it's tough to get entrepreneurial experience. And I think it's important that more young people have the opportunity to be entrepreneurial.
And I couldn't agree more. And so do you think that entrepreneurial bug was born or made? Is it something that's just always been inside of you, or where did it come from?
I think probably a little bit of both. I definitely think a good chunk of it comes from inside of me and from different life experiences that I have had. A significant number of my family members are entrepreneurs. My father is an entrepreneur. My grandfather is an entrepreneur. My other grandfather is an entrepreneur. So my family definitely influenced my entrepreneurial passion. I would also say that there's a degree to which I developed more entrepreneurial experience or interest over time. I look at different kind of experiences I did in university that were quite entrepreneurial. And I think those experiences definitely influenced me to want to take on kind of risk. So I think the more that I experience entrepreneurship, I realize this is for me. So to answer your question, it's a mixture, I think, of family experiences and then some experiences that I chose that then really got me hooked on entrepreneurship as a path.
And you mentioned that one of the things that you love is to advocate for and support young people. Where did that passion come from?
I think a couple of things. One is that I was a pretty enterprising young person like myself, and sometimes felt that as someone who's pretty politically engaged and active throughout my like teenage years, even when I was like a kid, I loved following like the news. I remember being like 8 or 9 and going to my grandparents and talking to my grandfather about like Canadian politics. So there's a degree, I think, to which I think that children and youth are not just these creatures that don't have like their own like feelings and like thinking. Because I definitely think of my own self, and I was very sentient and aware of what was going on in the world. And I think my own experiences as a child and young person makes me enthusiastic around the importance of empowering young people to reach their full potential. And the final thing I'd say too is that I think one of the things that's so important about helping young people is that if you can help someone when they're young, it can have a huge impact on the rest of their like life trajectory. And I think there's a reason why so many philanthropists or foundations focus on youth. It's because it's like the return on investment can be massive. And then when I think of the context of my life, my purpose in life, my life mission statement is to help others achieve their full potential. I think interventions when people are relatively young can have significant long-term positive impact.
Mm-hmm. And how has Venture for Canada changed in the years since you founded it?
It has changed a ton. The initial idea was a fellowship program where we recruit, train, and support recent graduates to go work at startups. And it was really just taking an American model and adapting it to Canada. Today, Venture for Canada has 4 different programs, and even the original program is completely different than what we first did. And when I reflect on my Venture for Canada journey, it's a testament to the fact that your initial idea is often completely different than what the idea ends up actually becoming. Like the best entrepreneurial ventures are things that are constantly growing, constantly evolving, never staying the same.
Yeah, completely. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And so when you think about the future, Scott, for you, for the work that you do, for Venture for Canada, for the imprint that you want to leave on the earth, how is success defined?
For me, going back to that mission statement of helping others achieve their full potential, I think the more that I can help other people be successful in whatever way that looks to them, that could be creating ventures, but that could also just be living a life that's meaningful and purpose driven. I think there's lots of ways you can like measure impact. I think the more that I'm helping other people be better versions of themselves, the more I feel like I'm achieving my life goal.
Well, and I'm curious about that actually. How do you measure impact and what are the various ways that you do that? Because I think that's a very big question that those of us that are working on social change often have to grapple with.
In the context of Venture for Canada, there's many ways that we measure the impact. On the short term basis, it's like number of people, but also like satisfaction rates, percentage who feel like they developed entrepreneurial skills, percent they, depending on the program, a bunch of other skills, communications, teamwork, collaboration, percentage of people who feel that participating in Venture for Canada increased their likelihood of wanting to become an entrepreneur and founding their own business, percent who actually end up doing it. But yeah, we measure a lot of different impact measures in the context of our work.
Got it. So let's turn our attention to the Uncertainty Advantage, your book, your first book. What inspired you, Scott, to write the book?
I was inspired to write The Uncertainty Advantage by my work at Venture for Canada, where I see firsthand that fear of uncertainty is one of the most significant things that holds people back in their lives and careers. And I've seen this firsthand. I've loved uncertainty at some points, like when I left Goldman Sachs to go create Venture for Canada. But I've also been paralyzed by uncertainty at other points. During COVID, I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. I had a really challenging year. I went through intensive mental health treatment, and it maybe took years for me to feel like myself again. Not necessarily everyone has OCD. I think fear of uncertainty is something that is baked into like our DNA in many ways, and I can talk a little bit more about why. But I was motivated by this book because it's not just me who can struggle with uncertainty. I think it is everyone. And in a world that is in many ways defined by rapid change, we all need to learn to develop a better relationship with uncertainty if we're going to both cope with the state of affairs, but also live flourishing, thriving lives.
I could not agree more. So you have tapped into one of my very favorite topics, which is how quickly the world is changing and that really palpable sense of uncertainty that it creates. And it's something I think about all the time, which is the world is changing so quickly and that rate of change is exponential. So it's only going to get faster. And at the same time, that fear of uncertainty is something that we all feel, but it's also kind of baked into our team cultures as well. And so when the rate of uncertainty is only going to increase and our fear of it and uncertainty of it is at best staying static, what does that foretell? And so before I ask you more about the book, I want to follow up on something you said. So you said fear of uncertainty is baked into our DNA. Say more. What do you mean about that? Where does it come from and how does it manifest?
When we were cave people wandering around and trying to figure out how we're going to like eat our next meal, there were so many ways that we could have just died from uncertain situations. That could be a bear like hiding in a cave, and you go by a cave and okay, this is a little uncertain. Am I going to about to get eaten by like a wild animal? Or you get cut and it's like pre-antibiotics. Am I going to get an infection and am I going to die? So in the past, uncertainty often resulted in extremely bad things happening to us. And that can still be the case. But the nature of sort of I think how our brains evolved, and different research shows this, is that we are developed as creatures to not like uncertain situations. Lots of studies and research shows that people often prefer knowing a bad situation rather than an uncertain outcome. And it's because we would rather know, like, in some cases, like a bad diagnosis than just sit in the uncertainty for a long time of do we have this or we don't have it. And that's at a high level kind of why we're baked into fear uncertain outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, you see that all the time. I just experienced that in my everyday life when somebody says, I need to talk to you about something, or do you want the good news or the bad news first? You always go bad news first because I don't like the uncertainty. I would much rather know a bad thing than sit in the in between. So that really speaks to me. What is the answer, Scott, that you lay out in your book in terms of how we deal with this uncertainty?
My book goes through six core pillars of advice. But those pillars include first, self compassion, the importance of talking to yourself in a kind way. And in an uncertain world that is very unpredictable, it is important to not be overly perfectionistic and to be very kind to yourself. The second pillar is the importance of adaptability. That if you set really rigid plans in an uncertain world, they can get thrown out pretty quickly. And it's important to be iterative and to be adaptive in the way that you think about the world. The third pillar is anti-fragility, which is essentially the ability to not just tolerate disorder, but to thrive from it. And you can do that through building out your risk-taking muscles and learning to push yourself gradually out of your comfort zone in a way that lets you take advantage of opportunities in a more effective way. The fourth pillar of the uncertainty advantage is the importance of generalist skills. In a world of AI, technical skills aren't going away, but they're going to become significantly less important. And the more that you invest in generalist skills like collaboration, time management, the more likely you're going to be able to thrive in a world where a lot of jobs are probably going to be displaced by AI, but probably new jobs are going to exist too. And the fifth pillar is the importance of an entrepreneurial mindset, essentially what we were talking about earlier, the ability to constantly identify and act upon opportunities to create value for others. And the final pillar of the uncertainty advantage is the importance of network building a network of both a wide range of contacts, but also of deep relationships that can help you socio-emotionally through the ups and downs of life, and also to be a giver in an efficient way. The people who I think are most successful, like long-term, aren't just about me. They are people who genuinely help others, and that ends up reaping benefits for them too.
Thank you for sharing those, and they all sound super interesting. So, first of all, I want to talk to you about, in our rapidly changing, evolving landscape, what career skills are most needed. So, you talked about general skills, and I think you also talk in the book about future-proof skills. So, tell us a little bit more about what those are and how we can navigate the career futures without a clear path as to what that's going to look like.
The era of like a 9 to 5 job that you do for like 35 years and then you retire is gone away. Increasingly, people are going to have to not just jump from jobs, but to jump across industries in a more extensive way. And I think one of the things that's really important also is that you're like quite effective at reinventing yourself when you think of like career planning. I think reinvention is like an underappreciated skill, but you look at a lot of some people who've had the most like amazing kind of careers. They're people who they're like start one career and then they go to a second career and then they go a third career. And it's amazing that they can just reinvent themselves from one thing to the other. Like, I mean, that could be everyone from like, you think of people like the Kardashians who have been queens of reinvention, like from, you know, being famous through like that in the OJ trial in like the 90s to then reality TV and now businesses, like they run huge multi-billion-dollar brands that are like part of their portfolio. They have been amazing at reinventing themselves. But I think there's so many other examples of that because people who aren't good at reinvention can easily get left behind because you constantly need to evolve and you have to evolve pretty quickly or you're potentially at risk of becoming more obsolete, especially in a world that's defined by rapid change. The final thing I'll say is studies show like the speed of which companies fall out of the S&P 500, the list of the sort of top 500 biggest companies. The duration that a company lasts in the S&P 500 is way less than it was in the past. And I think that also applies to your career. You might have staying power in something for a period of time, but you always need to be looking ahead and thinking, what's the next thing? Because I think if you're not doing that, you're going to put yourself in a more vulnerable situation.
Well, I think that's really fascinating, Scott, in the realm of social change. You know, I feel like my age group were raised by people who had one career for 40 years. And so certainly me and my peers, we were asked that question, like, what's your career going to be? And as we have gone through the first half of our careers, that's completely changed. And so not only have we had to let go of this idea of like, oh, this career that I prepared myself for isn't going to be my one true love, and really wrapped our head around what that reinvention has to look like, we've also had to start thinking, what is it going to be? What am I going to do next? And then you layer over that for those people who do dedicate their careers to social change, social impact, to figuring out where they're going to dedicate themselves when funding often really changes what you can do in social impact. So, for example, in the early 2010s, there was a ton of funding available around LGBTQ equality. And there were a lot of jobs in that. And that is not true today. Another example, there is a lot of funding available right now around housing, homelessness, and housing insecurity. That was not true in the past. And so these things, switch and change just like other sectors do. And so my question for you is, I completely hear what you're saying about you need to be flexible and you need to be able to reinvent yourself. That's, I think, a pretty easy concept to wrap your head around. I think what's harder is how. How do you actually do that when you've dedicated your time, your energy into specializing in something and all of a sudden those opportunities are going away?
I think one of the key pieces of advice is to not overly specialize. So it's not going to zoom in and to a career path that is really like niche. And then for a reason that opportunity evaporates and then you're like, now what? Even to share as a personal example for myself, I've led Venture for Canada for 11 and a half years. I've now made a decision after an amazing run to leave and I'm going to go launch something new. And even though I've kind of within Venture for Canada reinvented myself multiple times because the org has changed in very significant ways, one of the reasons I decided to leave was I was like, I don't want to just be an entrepreneurship education person for the rest of my life. That's too narrow of a niche and that pigeonholes me from a bunch of things. So the second piece of advice that I would say is sometimes you have to make big, bold bets and go into a lot of uncertainty and be okay with being a beginner. Like I'm going to go into a space where it's sort of related to VFC, but I'm not as much of an expert in. And that's going to be a degree of humble pie for me because I'm going to have to start from the basics in certain things. So the second part is that ability to go into the unknown and to have a beginner's mindset. And I share that in the sense I'm eating my own pie. Like I am giving this advice, but also actually following through with it. And a third thing I would say, in terms of for folks, in terms of how to navigate this, particularly maybe if you have already specialized, is think about ways that you can, if you're still employed, let's say full time in a role, like do side hustles, or if you get suddenly laid off, like think about not necessarily finding a next job, but think about building a portfolio for yourself. What I mean by that is like the world is increasingly going to not be made of employees, it's going to be made of freelancers. And I think that in the future, probably the vast majority of people are going to be freelancers, and there's not going to be that many people who are salaried employees. And there's pros and cons to that, and there's challenges around precarity. But I also think there can be, for entrepreneurial people, a lot of like freedom to that. And I'd say, if you're afraid of over specialization, like think about getting some consulting contracts, or what are different businesses that you can build, or what's different freelance consulting work that you can do where you can build a diversified career in the same way that someone would build a diversified investment portfolio for themselves. Like having all your eggs in one basket, whether it's investments or your career, puts yourself at more risk.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and so what you said about taking big, bold bets leads us really nicely into one of the pillars you outlined, which is anti-fragility. So tell us again what anti-fragility is and what it looks like in practice.
Anti-fragility is the ability to not just tolerate disorder and chaos, but to benefit from it. And an anti-fragile person in some ways seeks out chaos because they get stronger from it and they enjoy it, and they reap benefits from it. And you can foster anti-fragility in your life through the ability to build up your risk-taking muscles, because the more comfortable you are taking risks, the more that you're comfortable going into the unknown, because inherently what is risk? It is uncertainty and its ability to kind of tolerate it. So if you want to be anti-fragile, build up your risk-taking muscles. And to be really concrete, some of the ways you can build your risk-taking muscles are go launch a side hustle, go do a stretch assignment at work that pushes you out of your comfort zone, go get coffee with someone who you've never met before. Like for all of us, there's different things that can build up our risk-taking muscles. And it's also to say that it's like we all have a different relationship with risk. So even if you're somebody who maybe is comfortable with risk-taking, what are even more ways that you can encourage or foster smart risk-taking? And the final thing I'd say as a caveat is that, and I think this is really important, is we all have different like socioeconomic realities. And it's easier to take risks if you have more of a social safety net, more advantages. And I show that in the sense that I think sometimes people hear the risk taking and they just say, well, okay, then that's easy if you have like this mass amount of wealth and kind of support. But everyone within the context of the situation they're in can build within their context more risk taking kind of gradually over time. And that would be my main advice on how to foster more anti-fragility.
I love that. Scott, I want to ask you next about mindset and how we think about uncertainty. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick ad break and then we'll come right back. It is such a tough time for nonprofits, agencies, and changemakers. Funding is tight, capacity is stretched, and your work matters more than ever. And you need communication support that can keep up. That's why we are super excited to introduce our new suite of modular, flexible services, built to help you and your storytelling stay visible, resilient, and connected when it matters the most. Whether you need a quick messaging refresh or adaptable on-demand support, Javelina is here to help you move forward with clarity and strength. You can see this list of services and discounted prices at javelina.co/rapid-response-services. Okay, so before the break, we were talking about skills, about career skills that we really need to develop to be able to thrive in this uncertain, changing environment. I want to turn our attention to mindset and how we think. And I think there were several pillars from the book that you mentioned that relate to mindset. And I want to ask you first about self compassion and self compassion as an antidote to perfectionism. So tell me a little bit more about this idea and how you learned this.
I have not been a very self-compassionate person at different points in my life, and that's how I learned it. I can be pretty relentless on myself,
Mm.
and I learned firsthand what happens when you don't have self-compassion. You get burnt out, and my experience of in COVID and getting diagnosed with OCD, I remember talking to my therapist, and she was like, "You're really hard on yourself. Like, have you ever realized that you're kind of a perfectionist?" And the extent to which maybe some of your OCD challenges are kind of like tied into the extremely high standards that I like put on myself that are unrealistic. And that was a great wake up call for me. And then I saw in the context of my work adventure for Canada, where so many other people are so mean to themselves that
Mm.
they would never talk to their friends like the way they talk to themselves in terms of self talk. And it was this mixture of my own personal experiences and struggle with self compassion, as well as seeing this broader picture that made me put this as the first pillar of the book.
Again, you're speaking my language. I feel like once I finally figured this out for myself and started practicing it as a habit was a real game changer and really reshaped a lot of my former challenges. And anytime I'm struggling, I come back to this as a first rule, self-compassion. What does it look like in practice? What are the habits that build into self-compassion?
One is the importance of just being mindful of like when you're not being self compassionate. So I think mindfulness is so important for many things, but one of it is like labeling, hey, I'm not being self compassionate to myself right now. I'm being really hard on myself. And not getting mad at yourself for being non self compassionate, but just labeling and understanding. I think the second is a tool that can be really helpful is recognizing your shared humanity with other people. That when you realize that you're stressed about something, but someone else in the world is probably stressed out about the exact same thing. And different studies and research shows that when you recognize that, it actually lowers your own anxiety in a different kind of way. So that's one tip that I would have that maybe is a little less widely kind of known. And a final tip is just to actually try to speak to yourself in a nice way when you're going through a challenging kind of time. I'll show you, even today, I've had a really busy day and I've had to deal with a bunch of crisis-esque kind of situations through various things that I'm involved with, and just things that are kind of either one crisis thing, another that's just like a high stakes thing. And as I was reflecting towards the end of the day, I'm like, okay, I'm feeling a little bit more tired. And then I was like, to be compassionate to myself, I had to deal with a lot of stressful things today. And in the past, I would get mad at myself. Oh, why aren't you more energetic? Why are you feeling a little bit more anxious? And it's like anyone, and probably who had to deal with the things I just did, would be feeling a little bit tired and maybe more anxious. So that's like an example of self compassion, like in the moment of my own self, kind of having it. And in the past, I would have just been like, "You're being a baby," but now I'm like, that is a lot of stuff that you've had to deal with. If a friend described the same thing to me, I would talk to them in that way rather than berating them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this so much. And like I said, I think this on a personal level, this area, practicing self compassion, being kind to yourself, really is such a game changer. And you are what you eat, you are what you think, you are what you consume. And so if you're consuming that negative self talk, it reinforces a pattern. That can be very difficult to break out of. And so I have found that practicing self compassion is about breaking it into micro habits and building those micro habits. And those things that you mentioned, the mindfulness, labeling, noticing the thought, recognizing our shared humanity, and then positive self talk are really powerful micro habits. If I can, I'll offer a couple of micro habits that have been really helpful for me too, in the same vein. One being that negative self talk, like otherizing it, so giving it its own name. And when that voice speaks to me, I can say, like, no, shh, don't, I don't need you right now. I'm not out of bed yet. Why are you telling me I can't do it?
Yeah, I love that. In the book, I talk about this idea of this like gremlin who's like on your shoulder saying, "Oh, you can't do this," or I talk about it in the context of actually social anxiety of someone saying like, "What you said was stupid. Like, why did you say that? Why did you do that?" And I think the same thing applies to being mean to yourself. Is sometimes like labeling the gremlin as this like kind of entity other than yourself is really helpful, and also it can be, I think when you get angry at a gremlin, it's not helpful. But when you just laugh at the gremlin, in my experience, it can be quite empowering.
Yeah. Yeah. I could not agree more with that. And when I talk to my gremlin, I talk to them as if they're kind of like an annoying cousin. Like, oh yeah, I hear you. Like, leave me alone. I'm not ready for this. I treat the gremlin's words with humor rather than with anger. So yeah, I completely relate to what you're saying. You also talked, Scott, about the importance of an entrepreneurial mindset. So tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
To be entrepreneurial is to identify and act upon opportunities to create value for others. And anyone can be entrepreneurial, not just a founder. And in a world that is more and more uncertain, the world is changing really quickly. So it means that there are also more opportunities available. And I think an entrepreneurial mindset is increasingly critical because you need to identify things as they come up and say, hey, there's this thing, there's an opportunity. And then let's like act on it. I'll use an example of this like book is a couple of years ago, I thought, hey, uncertainty, bigger thing. A lot of young people are struggling on it. No one's written a book that's for young people, 18 to 25, 18 to 30, although it can also be valuable for people of any age. I think it'd be a book that will help people. I think it's a really specific niche. Like, I'm going to go act on it and write this book. And, I think I was slightly ahead of my time in this since I started this in 2023. Trump gets elected, AI blows up. And then a lot of people are now like, oh, you see, the timing of your book works really well. But it's sometimes having the foresight to think, hey, it seems like things are getting a little bit more off kilter in the world. Hey, I'm going to actually pursue this idea. And similarly, even as I leave EFC now, I have an idea that's in a sort of emerging space. And when I've looked at so many friends or colleagues who've had outsized career success, they're often very entrepreneurial in their mindset, of the sense that they see an opportunity when it's at something in an early stage space that's about to really take off, and they go there. And then when you're on a rocket ship industry or a rocket ship kind of opportunity, there are way more opportunities presented to us. Like, it's way easier to be in a rocket ship than to be in a declining industry. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing I would say is like, if you're looking for career acceleration, think about how you can get onto rocket ships rather than sinkholes.
Well, which leads us really nicely into another of the pillars, which I think I could argue falls into mindset, which is adaptability. So this idea that you adapt in the face of uncertainty. So talk a little bit more about that and how you discovered that as a core skill.
One of the stories to talk about in the book in terms of my relationship with adaptability was when I first moved to the United States to go to Georgetown. Within like 2 weeks, I was hospitalized for 4 nights because of a major infection in my face. And when you're Canadian, you're moving to the US, you're also navigating a completely different healthcare system. I was also 18 and I had never lived away from home before. And this health issue persisted over the span of like 3 months, where I had to go to the emergency like 7 or 8 times. I ended up in November having to have another major surgery and having to like basically not take classes for 2 weeks. And I still did end up doing my exams. But my idea of my first semester at Georgetown was completely different, because rather than socializing and kind of meeting people, it was like adapting. Like, I felt like I was in an adaptation Olympics. Like, I was adapting to being away from home. I was adapting to living in a different country. I was adapting to suddenly being sick all of a sudden. And what does that mean? And how do I deal with that? And I was also just like 18. I was super young. And I had to take all this pain medication. Anyway, it was a long experience. But for me, that taught me at a young age just the importance. You have to roll with the punches. And in an uncertain world, you often deal with things that can destroy your plans really quickly. So that's where I more than any other time really learned the importance of being adaptable.
And what does the adaptability skill set look like in the real world?
The adaptability mindset includes a couple of things. One is the ability to have iterative plans. So that means not creating really rigid goals for yourself of in 1 year I'm going to have this job, in 3 years I'm going to have this job, 5 years this job. I think one of the main ways that especially young people can sabotage themselves is to create these really rigid goals for themselves, and then they don't happen, and then they get devastated. So be iterative in your planning. Don't create really specific goals for yourself that are long term in nature, because I think the world changes really fast, and all you're doing is wasting time and energy. Potentially going to make yourself really disappointed. At point one. Point two is think about using objectives and key results, which is like a business tool, in the context of your own like life. So be iterative and think on in this context of quarters of like, hey, what's my objective for the quarter? What are my key results of how I'm going to measure my progress in that quarter? And maybe to go a couple quarters out. So you want to be maybe more specific in your plans in the short term, but be really flexible in terms of the long term. And the third and final point is, yes, you want to be adaptable, but you also don't want to be like a ship in the wind, just getting pulled in any direction. You have to think about what is your big like purpose and why. And that's why I really recommend people create a personal like mission statement for their life. And a key part of being adaptable is actually knowing like what's the general direction that you do want to go. And I'm amazed the amount of young people and just people in general who I talk to, and I'll ask them the question, what is your life mission statement? And they have never put any thought into this like, question. And these are some really ambitious, hardworking people who want to create change in the world, but it's like they've never sat down with their thoughts and really reflected like the why. And for me, it is to help other people achieve their full potential. But beyond your personal mission statement, you also have to be thinking about what are your core values. That could be integrity. For me, it's integrity, inclusiveness, ambition, curiosity. And the way you can come up with your core values is think about in the moments when you're most challenged, what are the values that show up to you? And you can do this process initially through writing down like 40 different values, but then starting to merge them together, realizing what fits under kind of others. And I know that this might sound like a more corporate kind of exercise of like, what's your mission statement? What are your like values? Like, are we like a bank, or is this like for a person? But I think it's a really important like tool, because it might just sound cliche that you're CEO of your own life, but you are. And you need to have, I think, in the same way that an organization does that, what is your reason for being, and what are the core values that like motivate you in your life? And so in short, to wrap it up, you need to have a true north of what you're trying to actually go after. In the medium term, you need to be really adaptable about how you achieve that long-term goal.
I love that you said that like flexible long-term vision, specific short-term goals, and a recent-ish current example of that. So I'm a runner, and I had set myself a while ago a goal to run a half marathon at a certain time. I had a certain time goal, and it was definitely a stretch goal, but I felt good about it. And I was working toward this, but I knew it was going to take me sort of multiple races to get there. And in the midst of training for that, I was, going along really well. And I sustained a really serious foot injury that resulted in surgery. And the surgery now is over 2 years ago. But it's been a whole thing. It's been a whole thing. It's been a whole journey. And I just never going to be the same runner that I was after my surgery that I was before. And that time goal is not necessarily completely gone, but I think the price I would have to pay to get there is not worth it. And so there was a lot of grief around this for me. I very much experienced what you were describing. I felt that I had failed, that I had set this goal for myself and I wasn't going to come near meeting it. And so I needed a new goal. And so my new updated long-term goal was that I would like to run for as long as I can in terms of the number of years that I live. And if that means running a minute and walking a half an hour, that's fine. But I would like to be right now a 75, 80-year-old runner. And that's the long-term vision. And then the short-term goals at the moment, because I'm still recovering from this surgery, are very short term. It's like week by week. How does my foot feel this week? What can I do this week? And that is working so much better for me than what I had done before. And I think I'll never know this for sure, but I think pursuit of that speed goal was probably in part what caused the injury in the first place, because I was not listening to my body. I was pursuing this goal, whether it made sense or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think your example is a great one. And I think athletes can sometimes get tripped up because they'll create they have this idea of a more linear progression of where they're going to go. And when you're training for a marathon or you're training for any kind of fitness goal, you can go on ChatGPT and you can create this whole plan for yourself. And you're often advised to, but there's so many things that can happen, injuries, like life. And, I think that sometimes athletes at a really competitive level can thrive a lot in our current world. But I've also observed sometimes in the transition from school to work is some athletes can struggle because the structure, the linearity that they're taught through like athletics is very different than how the world often functions.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And, I think that's what I love about your framework in the uncertainty advantage is it is rooted in how the world functions today and how we know it's going to continue to keep changing, which leads me into the last pillar that we haven't discussed yet, which is to build your network. And, we've talked about skills, career skills, we've talked about mindset, and now I want to talk about people, because none of us are changing world in a vacuum. So we are networked with other people. We're connected with other people. And so talk to me about network building and how this builds into, or how this connects to, making the most of the uncertainty that we operate within.
In a world that is very chaotic, who you know is more important than ever before. And that's because when things really fall apart, it's your network who's going to help you get your next job or your next freelance gig or help you launch your new new business, both in the sense of like from connections and like money and things like that, but also in the sense of like socio-emotional support, like going through tough times. It's your friends, your close family members who are really going to help you out. And what I talk about in the book is the importance of both having a wide network, but also a deep network. A wide network is really important because that's where a lot of opportunities come from. One of the most cited sociology papers of the last 70 years is a paper called The Strength of Weak Ties by Mark Granovetter. And he talks about how in a study in the early 70s, he found that most people get hired through their weak ties, like acquaintances, people that they might have worked with like a long time ago. And he argues that weak ties are the most important. But lots of other researchers come out more later on that strong ties are actually way more important for socio-emotional support, for guidance, for mentorship. And I actually think this dichotomy and these wars between academics, between what's more important, strong ties or weak ties, is kind of a false choice, a false dichotomy. At the end of the day, both are really important, and especially in an uncertain world, because you need to have an advisory board, not in a formal like a board of directors, but a group of people in your corner you can go to for advice. That's really important. But you also need a much larger group of people who you can go to and you keep in touch with. And one of the things in my experiences of writing this book, a tangible thing I started to do was I created like a monthly newsletter that I kept on adding people who are more weak ties, but also strong ties are part of it. But the majority of the people there are not people who I'm talking to weekly, because I can't regularly, have coffee chats with 1,400 people. But it's been an amazing tool because I send it to 1,400 people that I know. Almost most of them are people who I know in some kind of capacity. And moving forward, it's just a great way. I have people reach out to me who I haven't talked to in years. And it's a way to keep the weak ties kind of a little bit stronger, because I'm showing up in their inbox and they're like, oh, hey, Scott. And the advice I'd have for the listener is think about things like what I talked about of this monthly update that I send to people. And it's not like a Christmas card of like, oh, this is what I did. It's like sending people things I think will actually be valuable. Like, these are the best things that I came across this month. Like, I hope that this is helpful. But also then think about show up for your friends, build meaningful relationships with people. And a final thing I would say to listeners is it's so important for folks to both develop a network that is wide and deep. And I think a mistake a lot of people make is that they lean too far in either direction.
That's really, really fantastic advice. And I think is different from a lot of the networking advice that we're given. And maybe prevents burnout if you recognize that both are valuable. Strong ties and weak ties. You don't have to try and be best friends with everybody.
Yeah, it's impossible.
It is impossible. Time consuming and expensive. Well, Scott, I am so incredibly grateful for everything that you have shared, these insights. We managed to make it through, I think, all 6 of the pillars, which is awesome. And I think that everything you provided just works really well for those that are working to make a difference in the world, because you're talking about very tangible, specific skills, mindsets, and people that we all need as we are adjusting to our very uncertain world and making sure that we thrive as much within it. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you just some really quick questions. So we're doing a speed round. And for those of you who have been listening for a while, you'll know that our speed round questions weren't very speedy. And so I'm shaking it up and trying some different questions. So first of all, Scott, tell us a great book that has informed your change making.
How to Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. It really got me to think about personal mission statement, the why. And we have a short time on Earth. It's important to measure our life, and a lot of people measure it too much through superficial, extrinsic rewards.
And who is one change maker who inspires you?
One change maker who really inspires me, actually, it's the board chair of Venture for Canada, who's someone who I've worked with for like 11 years since the very beginning of the Venture for Canada experience. And he has been so giving to me and to Venture for Canada as completely as a volunteer that I'll give a shout out to Parm Gill, because I am very grateful for everything that he did. And I think sometimes people can just mention like famous people, but it's also nice to mention people who have directly touched your own life.
100%, 100%. What is a daily habit that keeps you grounded?
A daily habit that keeps me grounded is exercising pretty much every day, because I find that if I don't, then I am negatively impacted in terms of my mental and physical health. After this, I'm actually going to go play some tennis. So
cool.
I love to exercise pretty much every day.
Do you have an exercise of choice?
Depends on the season, especially in Canada. But yes, there's summer activities, winter activities here. So very seasonal.
Very cool. What is the best advice you have ever received?
The best advice that I ever received is that learning to work with difficult people is a gift.
I love that. It actually makes me think of something we were talking about earlier in the episode. When we were talking about big, bold bets and having anti-fragility. Somebody told me earlier this year, never waste a good crisis. And I've come back to that time and time again, this idea of like finding the gold in the nonsense, I guess.
Totally.
And can you describe change making in one word?
To me, change making is identifying and acting upon opportunities to create value for others. It is at the core, change making is being entrepreneurial.
Being entrepreneurial. I love it. I love that so much. I couldn't agree more either. Scott, lastly, how can folks connect with you? How can they find the book, and how can they connect with you and your work?
Folks can check out The Uncertainty Advantage on Amazon.com. It's available in the United States on September 16th, and it's available in Canada as of August 19th, and it'll be available in the UK as of October 28th. And folks can also buy it at Barnes & Noble, at independent bookstores across Canada and the United States. To learn more about me, you can check me out on Substack, where I have my monthly newsletter that I mentioned earlier. And you can also check out my personal website, where you can just type in STI, 2 R's, ET, 2 T's.com, so Stirrett.com. Benefit of having a unique last name is you can buy your own last name. And on my website, there's a short quiz where you can fill out or answer some questions and get a score from 0 to 48 of how comfortable you are with uncertainty. And I recommend you to take this quiz, because the first step of learning how to develop a better relationship with uncertainty is learning what is your current relationship with uncertainty.
I love that. I love that so much. Well, Scott, once again, thank you so incredibly much. I'm really grateful for your time, especially on the heels of what has been a challenging day. So thank you so much.
Thanks. It was a pleasure speaking with you.